Wanjiru Gikonyo is our guest host today. Now that City has gone to purchase new batteries, he says his batteries he's bought the batteries, they've been fitted. Been testing. See his batteries for his system.
Yes, it's important to buy new batteries.
He has got
or
new
recharge
batteries,
them every so often.
Yeah. Now he's just got new batteries. Those ones that are maintenance free. The color there is green.
Yes.
Good to go.
Permanent.
He's coming on Monday.
What?
Evergreen.
Don't miss.
Why?
The new and improved City.
Powerful. Plus. With extra everything.
With wings.
Yes. Wanjiru, we want to have a conversation now about open government and whether open government is working in Kenya. And we're joined by two ladies. One is called Sarah. The other one is called Sarah.
Exactly.
Good morning, Sarah and Sarah. Sarah Wesonga is a program officer at Right to Information. That's Article 19. Good morning, Wesonga.
Good morning, Eric.
Karibu sana to Kenya's biggest conversation. And then the other one is from the government side. Sarah Muthiga is the Assistant Director for Complaints, Legal and Regional Coordination at the Office of the Ombudsman, the Commission on Administrative Justice. Why did the Constitution people just not call it Ombudsman and forget about the commission things?
Because there was a lineup, I imagine, Chapter 15 institutions that are commissioned.
She just call it Ombudsman, and everybody. So this is a commission.
It is still the Ombudsman.
Yeah,
but it's let me not speak.
Commission on Administrative Justice, and the Assistant Director is Sarah Muthiga. Good morning.
Good morning, Eric.
Welcome to the conversation.
Thank you very much.
Asanteni sana for joining us. Let me give you the day's proverb on behalf of CT. This proverb is from West Africa, the countries of Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, that region. Forget everything else that's going on around there.
Okay.
Let me tell you. The proverb that they have, this is it. It's true that the camel will eventually die, but he will never stretch out and lay flat on his back. It's true that the camel will eventually die, but he will never stretch out and lay on his back. Wesonga, what do you make of that proverb? What's your interpretation of it?
I think on the surface level, it's just to acknowledge everything is finite. Everything has to come to an end one way or the other. And acknowledging that means that you keep walking day by day and not just give up because you know eventually you're going to die. So if tomorrow all of us decide we are not living anymore because we'll eventually die, then what's the point? So that's my very surface level interpretation.
That's not surface, boy. What surface are you talking about? You've got like 4 layers of surface.
Exactly.
Sour.
You see, civil society, who you people talk badly. Well, this is depth. Actually, the problem is aligning the level.
You are setting up Muthiga. Now, surely. What's your interpretation of it?
Go for it. We're good.
Let me see. I'll be very surface. Okay. And going by it, I mean, I'd say pretty much the same aspect that it's true we do have an end and everything must come to an end. But look at a camel. A camel cannot lay on its back. So it will not give up. It cannot fall and roll over. It must fight. It must stand firm. And therefore, if we must all be like that, if somewhere or another, what is your breaking point? Do you have one? And if you do, how do you work through it?
Serikali 5.
Yes.
Civil society
5.
Tuko
hapo. Then youth in the room. Yes.
Sour.
Yeah.
Very well said and very well done. Now, when it comes to access to information, I know Article 19, you've been championing that. But there are many people who don't know what Article 19 is in terms of who you are and why Article 19. So introduce us to Article 19.
Well, thank you, Eric. I think that's one of the most common questions we get when we say we are Article 19. The question is Article 19 of what? Is it the Constitution? Is it a particular law? We were named after, or rather we borrowed our name from Article 19 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. This is like the global blueprint document that set the foundation for human rights across the world. And Article 19 specifically speaks to everyone has the right to freedom of expression, to opinion and expression, and this includes the right to seek opinion as well as to seek or
seek opinion or information without interference. And so basically at Article 19, what we do is that we try to champion for the right of every person everywhere to be able to speak their opinions, to hold government into account without fear of any retaliation or any fear of interference. We are a global international NGO, also a think tank, and we have about 9 hubs across the world, and I work for the Eastern Africa office, which is based in Kenya. We work closely with very diverse group of stakeholders. We work with international human rights institutions like the United Nations or the Africa Commission. We have observer status with both. We also work with governments from a technical perspective, where we help governments come up with policies and laws that would have international human rights standards. We also help build the capacity of government or other duty bearers who are supposed to help protect freedom of expression and information. We work together to build the capacity of public servants in that sector for them to be able to safeguard those rights. We also work with, on the other side, on the demand side now, we work with media, obviously, because freedom of expression, goes hand in hand with press freedom. We work with civil society organizations to help them hold governments into account. And we also work on the demand side with citizens to be able to allow them to know their rights, and not just their rights, but how do you hold government into account? How do you use your rights to be able to monitor what government is doing, and how do you demand for better governance? In a nutshell.
I think your surface level and nutshells. Okay. All right. The Commission on Administrative Justice. So like Wanjiru is saying, Constitutional Commission, some lines there, independent offices. But tell us, from the horse's mouth.
Yes, thank you. So the Commission on Administrative Justice, otherwise known as the Office of the Ombudsman, is established under Article 59 of the Constitution. And this article is what establishes the commissions that are required to protect human rights, investigate into matters of public administration or misconduct in state affairs and abuse of office. So this commission is established also under the CAJ Act, that is the Commission on Administrative Justice Act. And this act provides the functions of the commission, which include investigation or an inquiring into misconduct or maladministration, that is includes delay, abuse of office, discourtesy, ineptitude, all the things which you would want government to do for you and they have failed to do or have delayed to do or have not done the way you would want them to do. The Commission therefore receives complaints or even can go on its own motion and investigate matters that we see in the public domain, and then inquire into them and then make recommendations or resolve the complaint, as it were. We also have another mandate, also under the Constitution, that is Article 35 on the right to access information. And this is further also under the Access to Information Act, which then gives the Commission oversight mandate over that function, that is implementing access to information in Kenya. And we have a lot of work we do around that. And what I'd also say is that our offices are in Nairobi, and we have 6 regional offices across the country. And then we also are in 12 Huduma centers. And also we are aiming to increase our presence. We also have an online platform where people can access us and lodge their complaints on matters public administration and access to information. Thank you.
Okay. We'll focus on the access to information, not the other things. Like yesterday, there was that story on the report of what's happening at immigration. We'll have a sidebar conversation on that. But access to information. And Wanjiru belongs to, well, are you still? No. Is it the Institute for Social Accountability that was part of the Okoa Mombasa initiative and several others, where you've been seeking information from government on several things? We want to know the SGR, details of the SGR contract. We want to know details of this and other contract, or like now public debt and such. So why is access to information important, Wanjiru?
Yeah, so let me frame it differently. Number one, I'm a founder, previously headed the Institute for Social Accountability.
Yes.
Which is the convener of Okoa Uchumi and collaborates and is a partner to Okoa Mombasa. So, first to correct that. And then also to situate this access to information conversation in that in 2011, I believe it was 2011, Kenya, the Open Government Initiative was launched, which deals with 7 or 8 transparency areas, which I think Sarah and Sarah can explain for us. And Kenya joined in 2011. So for the last 12 years, is it 12, 13 years, Kenya has been a member and is a steering committee member of the Open Government Partnership. So first is just to let that sink in, that this government that we deride a lot, because we complain a lot about our government, does have a side to it that in the regional and international arena, we are very well viewed. The World Bank, I think in 2021, cited Kenya's public finance management system as possibly among the top 5. I think it was like the 4th most open financial system. The IMF fiscal consolidation program, which is bringing a lot of pain to us, has come with a lot of policies we do not like, has on the other hand brought a lot of transparency. If you listened to Jimmy Wanjiru here, when he was talking about the investigations, the audits they've done, expenditure tracking they've done on debt, and the likelihood that we've overpaid our debt by 1 trillion shillings, they're using public data. So first is to acknowledge that there's a lot going on, and a lot of that is anchored under the Open Government program. So it's useful to, and then we've had 4 plans. The program is implemented through national action plans. And we are now developing the 5th national action plan. So, you know, the purpose today is to understand what this is, and also to ask how it's, obviously it's working at some level, but what more needs to happen?
Let's start by defining it then. What is open governance or open government? What does it mean? Open to what? To what extent?
Okay, I think that will tie into the first question that you asked about access to information or the right to information. Open government is literally premised on access to information. And the concept of access to information, we believe that information belongs to the citizen, and governments hold that information as custodians. Basically, they hold it on behalf of the citizens. And what that means is that every citizen has actually the right to access this information, to enable them to monitor how government is working, to allow them to be able to make informed decisions with regards to their government, and also to be able to participate in whatever the government is doing. And so it's with that in mind that you've seen over the past decade, we went from about 5-10 countries having access to information laws to right now 124 countries across the world having access to information law. That is about 92% of the global population living in a country with a right to information or access to information. And why is this? Governments realize that when the citizens are not aware, they cannot participate. Civil society cannot hold government into account, and government cannot even say, we have done this, we've worked on 1, 2, 3, 4, when it's opaque. So there's this global shift from opaqueness to more transparency, and that is what gave birth to the concept of open government. And so open government is a government that allows transparency. Public scrutiny is anchored on certain principles that include public participation, and not just public participation, but meaningful and inclusive public participation. It thinks about open budgets and open transparency, meaning government budgets are open for scrutiny and input. Also, another aspect of open government is the aspect of public participation, the aspect of open asset recovery, and all these things. Basically, anything that is going to help government be more transparent, allow citizens to be able to access public information, is the concept of open government. And that's why, as Shiro said earlier, that in 2011, government leaders from across the world came together and realized that what could be open, the challenges I'm facing in terms of transparency and openness in my country are very different from what Kenya is having, very different from what Nigeria is having. But is there a way that we could come together, leverage on our strengths, guided by similar values and principles, and figure out how could we tackle this in our own jurisdictions? And
so do we come up with does the term then open governance exist because governments have started to become open, or does it exist because it's encouraging governments to be open?
I would say that it's twofold in this way. First of all, I think what should be mentioned is that the Open Government Partnership is actually voluntary. So governments get into it on a voluntary basis. And the fact that the government governments have committed to it, it means that they are willing to become open. Now, we should remember Article 10 of our Constitution encourages or requires governance to be transparent, accountable, and also it requires public participation and all that. So it aligns to, therefore, what we should do. So to answer your question, it's a requirement. We are then supposed to be, by virtue of our Constitution, government is supposed to be open. And government is trying to be open, and that's why the commitment to open government partnership and the national action plans and what the commitments made, because these commitments are voluntarily brought on board with a 2-year plan to meet the milestones, so that you we as a government or we as a country meet the requirements of open government. So to answer your question, it's mandatory by virtue of our Constitution. And then does it exist? It does, for purposes of good governance. Yes.
What are the commitments?
Okay, let me explain what the commitments are in the current national action plan. To begin with, there's the aspect of beneficial ownership of companies, where I think you saw it, and the Business Registration Service is actually the lead on this. This is under the Office of the AG, where companies or the government is supposed to be able to publicize who are the beneficial owners of companies. And I think you saw that running a few months ago, where there was a deadline to how to register who are the beneficial owners.
So, for instance, like right now, there's a lot of hue and cry about the housing levy. Notwithstanding, government has gone ahead and identified a contractor, would you call it, or a developer who's going to handle that. And I was listening to the news, and a name came up. It means that if I went to the registry, I could find the owners of that company?
That is what it means.
It's what
yes, because here's the thing about access. Here's what the thing about access to information. And if I can quickly run through the obligations, and then we'll meet the milestones as quick as I can. So apart from beneficial ownership, the second is open contracting, and this is what we see under the public procurement process, where it's a requirement of all government agencies to actually put out their tenders and who has received them, and who are the vulnerable groups that have gotten the tenders and what are the costs of the contracts and all that. That's another obligation. The third is open data for development. They're supposed to be accessible data out there. You've spoken about Wanjiru, what you do as an entity and how you try to seek this information. Now, what should be known is that access to information is supposed to be proactively disclosed by government. So this is the information that should be available for data for development or for planning. Public participation and legislative openness. It's a requirement. It's an obligation. So we report, or rather the government reports on what they have done to make sure there's openness and public participation in legislation. Improved service delivery, public service delivery. What are the service standards of institutions? Where have you, what are your service charters? Are you meeting your timelines? And then report on the same. And I think you've seen about the performance contract process of ministries and agencies and how seriously this government is taking it. So it's supposed to be about improving public service delivery. Access to information, which is why we're here, and what the CAJ actually oversights or makes sure it's implemented. Aspects of what are the parameters for access to information, what laws have been passed. And remember, for open governance partnership, it's not only for national government, it's also for subnationals. So even counties, we are in the counties making sure or assisting them to pass laws on access to information, because the Access to Information Act requires counties to pass their own legislation on the parameters for ATI. The sixth is, or rather the seventh, is access to justice. Legal aid, that is national legal aid for Kenyans or public, and the alternative justice system policy. Where are we on making sure there's justice in Kenya? So that's another obligation under the OGP. Building open government for resiliency. Building open government resiliency. What does it mean? It means the government is able to support open governance and have programs that are meaningful towards open government. Now, you coming back to for example, what you said, the housing levy and the company, and whether you should be able to access this information. What CAJ trains and sets and assists government agencies to set up is what are their frameworks for public information. Now, we we say, or rather we have in our laws and our policies and regulations, a procedure which if you're not able to access that information, let me say it like that. If you go to BRS today or any agency and you're not able to access that information, CAJ then exists for you to come to us and request for that information. Basically saying, I went to this agency, they did not give me the information, and I need it. Not for any reason. You don't even have to give why you need it. It's because information is supposed to be accessible. Now, here's the thing, where the law now comes in. There are limitations. Limitations under Section 6. So right now, I would not be able to tell you, is that information public? It is supposed to be, as far as it's supposed to be information that affects the public,
right,
and should be proactively disclosed or should be accessible. But then when you come to the CAJ, we then are able to engage that institution on your behalf and ask them to provide that information within 21 days. Failure to which, it becomes we can actually issue an order. That is an order for that agency to release that information. Now, agencies at that point would respond with the why. I have this information, I'm not able to release because of what. But remember, it's limited. You cannot just say national security, for example. You have to qualify it, and that's why we come in. Right. And then remember, there's still under the law the public interest override, where the CAJ will look at it and say, no, this is in the public interest, so release that information.
In order for this to be an issue, right, I'm looking at it that it comes from a place maybe years ago where the zeitgeist was that you hide information, you're not letting anybody know what's going on, you're protecting information for the reasons could be nefarious, reasons could be because there's plundering of funds, there's other things going on, national security, one might say. So this is then, when you're looking at having an open government, it is as a result of things that were happening before that were dangerous, or to say that in order for us to be developing economies whereby we are accepted or introduced or part of a global community, that it is necessary for the governments to be open. Is it as a result of how things were happening before, and we say no to that, and to allow us to be more open, as it were?
I think it's both, actually, because the issue of secrecy and opaqueness is a cultural issue. There's a reason why in Kenya we used to call government sirikali, meaning, a strong secret. There's a reason why we used to come, at some point used to make jokes that you'd go into a government office and find a newspaper stamped as confidential. It's also because from a cultural perspective, Africans stem from a very culture of secrecy. If it's not your business, it's not your business. You're not going to tell this household's business in the neighbor's house. And so, unfortunately, we carried this culture of secrecy into the public service. And so, over time, we've realized that the culture of secrecy is not taking us anywhere, because unless citizens know how we're using their taxes, what are we doing in terms of budgeting? Why is education receiving this and healthcare receiving that? Where did that money go? Why did we opt to build a road and not a school? Unless government is able to provide that information, citizens do not know what their governments are doing. They do not know where to find government services. And then at the end of the day, it's both twofold. No national, and even, from a global sort of perspective, companies and also governments that are aligning with open government and transparency principles want to align with countries that are, forward-facing, countries that are open, countries that are transparent, because no one wants to say we went to bed with this and such a country, which does not disclose how they do their budgets, which does not disclose how their parliaments work. So it stems from that culture of secrecy, being able to sort of break that culture, but then forward-facing, looking at if you are going to ask for, a lot of investment opportunity from the private sector, if you're inculcating private sector principles in governance, then what are we looking at? And that was one of those sort of stepping stones or sort of ideas that made the shift to access to information and transparency become a priority.
We're saying open government touches on beneficial ownership, open procurement, data, performance contracting, and all those other things. If I wanted to know who got the contract for building the Shaurimoyo houses using the housing levy and the dams that are being contracted, what's the process in terms of the beneficial ownership and the contracting process? And you say I don't need a reason, I can just do it.
Okay. To begin with, all tenders in government and who's awarded those tenders is supposed to be or is available on the public procurement website. There's actually a website.
There's a website.
Yes.
The
Public Procurement Information Portal. Sorry. So that any tender that is awarded within government is on that platform. Now, what you'd get is what is a tender, when was it advertised, what are the processes, who was awarded, and what is the cost of the contract, the duration, and all that. Now, as to beneficial ownership, it becomes an application you do for the BRS. Now, for the Office of the AG, which is Attorney General's Office, Business Registration Service, that is BRS, and there now you then apply to see or to know basically search the company, and then you get what is called the CR12, which should tell you who the owners of the company are. Should be the process, or that is the process that you look for ownership of companies. As to where we are on publicizing beneficial owners, I think it's all a digitization. It's what you hear what government is doing, the digitization plan. There's a plan to have everything digitized, and it should include, or it includes aspects as that, because the commitment is under beneficial ownership is to publicize who the beneficial owners of companies are. And even now, if you check, you may not find it. You may find processes that are still being implemented for how to digitize that process, because digitization, as we know, is resource intensive, and it's only recently that we've started seeing this.
But Sarah, excuse me. BRS is already digital.
Yes.
All right. You register your company today on the digital platform. When the government said, let's now add the new information on beneficial owner, it was also being done digitally. So, with that being said, therefore, that information should be digital.
Absolutely.
I mean, what else are they doing?
And that's why I would even want to ask Wanjiru, have we tried? Have you tried to look for that information?
So go to tenders.go.ke.
Yes.
Go for a project, and then you see the company that has been awarded a tender, and then you go to BRS and look for the CR12 for that company, and then that's where you'll be able to get, these are the directors, these are the beneficial owners of that company.
Yes.
Basically, that's the process.
Okay. And I want to say that I have not tried that right now.
Right.
But that should be the process. And ideally, you should therefore find all that information available online.
Right.
Then if you find it is not, that is when you come to CAJ. And that's the Office of the Ombudsman, where you request and say, this information is not available, and we want it, or we should have it.
And
So as we sit here...
Sorry.
What we do, we now engage the BRS itself, because by law, there's a requirement for them to respond to us. So if they're not doing it, the first thing is they should have done it. Let's say proactive should have done it. Now, if it's not done, then we engage them on two fronts. Number one, apart from doing the usual, where we'll request information, ask them to provide it to Wanjiru, and then tell them that you should do this and make sure it's online. Now, if it's not, now that's where we come in with another function of ours called advisories, where we issue advisories to that agency on the parameters that they must meet for them to be compliant. Remember also, under the performance contracting framework, there are many aspects on what entities report on, and one of them is access to information, where they report quarterly to the CAJ on what they have proactively disclosed, because we also do a checklist to check for their compliance, and then what they have reacted to, for instance, Wanjiru's query, which have they responded or not. Then from us now, we then certify, that is, give them a certification on whether they're compliant or not. And this goes back to the performance contract of the accounting officer of that agency.
Okay.
Yes.
Would you know if they did or didn't, if nobody came to complain? For example, I mean, you're not sitting there. I would assume that you're not sitting there with radar up every minute, looking at every agency and finding out if their information has been made public. You would only be aware if Sarah came to complain and say, look, I needed this information, I have not been able to get it. Then you would know, all right, somebody has not complied, isn't it?
Well,
or is your radar up checking?
Now, our radar is up also because we have a compliance unit. Now, our compliance unit function is to, first of all, and together with our ATI unit or department, is to set up what are the frameworks that every agency is supposed to have. We have over 400 government agencies that report to us on aspects of complaints management and access to information. And they report quarterly. And we have two fronts in that reporting framework. Number one is proactive disclosure, and what are you supposed to proactively disclose? Now, because of the National Action Plan, one of them will be, or is supposed to be, beneficial ownership.
Right.
Yes.
So the question for us with BRS, or the parameters for us with BRS, would be beneficial ownership.
Yeah.
And what's the
How far are you on this,
percentage
right?
of compliance in terms of numbers across these many agencies, as well as the quality of compliance? Because, look, I can tell you anything. How far I'm going to go then really depends on my desire to let you know this information. But surface level, and there's that word again, it could just be the very basic minimum.
Yeah.
But what's the depth of compliance as well as the percentage of compliance across board?
Okay, I'll say this. In the last financial year, currently we're now doing the compliance assessment for this year ended June 2023. But I want to say that the previous year, that is of about 325 institutions that were under the performance contracting framework and actually reported to us, over 60% were actually compliant on the framework as developed at the time. Because remember, access to information is a 2016 commitment, so to speak, under the law. Therefore, the CAJ started looking at it in 2017. So even the first thing was also developing regulations. What are the regulations and guidelines for how to do it? Because remember, it's new. So most people or most agencies don't know what they're supposed to do. And even for us, so the parameters keep improving, so to speak, on what should be disclosed, how should it be disclosed, what are the reporting frameworks, what are the sanctions, if at all. And that's why even now, I think the regulations were then published this year in 2023. That is actually when the regulations on access to information were published. And you can imagine now, again, we go back to training, because among our functions is also building capacity of all these agencies. So among the things that all these agencies must do under the performance contract is be trained on access to information, frameworks, proactive, reactive, and reporting and compliance. So that's what we end up doing, or we have been doing for the last, and we keep doing it anyway, training all these institutions to make sure they meet the parameters.
So the government is open, Sarah?
I would say we're still under the Open Government Partnership Framework, as Sarah has also said that there's the law and then there's also the reality on the ground. And again, I've said it's a whole of a lot of training and cultural change and reimagining cultural perspectives. And one of the things we realized, even from civil society, when it came to building the capacity of government, the idea was that even though the law is enacted in 2016, very few government officers were aware of their obligation under the law, despite efforts from CAG to train them. We've collaborated with them on a number of training. We've done a training on with the County Assemblies Forum, just allowing the counties to understand this, an access to information law. This is your obligation and whatnot. We've trained different departments, ministries and agencies, from public procurement to Ministry of Health and whatnot. And we realized that then that is not sustainable. How are we able to make sure that all these public officers who are mandated with facilitating the right to information are not just aware, but they're able to understand their obligations under the law? And that was in the current National Action Plan on the Open Government Partnership, that with Article 19 and the Commission on Administrative Justice, we lead the access to information commitment. We provide support from the civil society side, they lead it from the government side. And one of the things we committed to was to come up with a curriculum, a standardized curriculum with the Kenya School of Government, to be able to train public officers on their obligations and requirements under access to information. And so we did this with support from IDLO and a number of civil society organizations within the OGP framework, obviously with the Commission on Administrative Justice. And we came up with the standardized curriculum. What is access to information? How did it come to Kenya? What does the law say? We came up with slides, we came up with training manual for the training of trainers. And as we speak, actually, the course is live at the Kenya School of Government. And what we're trying to rally up right now is that uptake, because again, that's, having the course is one thing, but uptake and that knowledge and getting most public officers to undergo it as part of the public officer training has been the challenge. And so if you look at the next National Action Plan that we are working on, is how do we improve uptake at the Kenya School of Government? How do we incentivize public officers to undertake that course? How do we work, because CAJ mandates government entities to appoint a public information officer, have their names displayed, them understand their role. So how do we make sure all these officers undertake that course? Because at the moment it's not mandatory, it's very much voluntary.
Can I ask a question? And this may be just to clarify, because I'm trying to make this practical, because we've been at this for a long time, we're improving it as we go. I'm looking at the tender.go.ke website, and we can see that in 2023-2024 there were 101 contracts awarded, and then there is view, and then the list will come up. From your assessment, because you say you do annual assessments, what is the level of compliance in terms of institutions, government institutions, in publishing on the website? Is this 101, all of them? And then also, are there exemptions? Because there are different types of procurement and partnership. So what are the exemptions?
Okay. First of all, on the percentage of compliance with that, you see, by law, that is also under the Public Procurement and Asset Disposals Act of 2015. It's a requirement to publicize. So on the face of it, I would say 100%, because if you fail to do so, then it becomes a whole sanction, disciplinary, and even legal penalties for lack of that disclosure, for lack of publishing. Are there exemptions? There are, especially matters of national security. You will not see tenders of national security matters there. That is, for example, tenders for the military, some tenders for the National Police Service. You will not see them. You may also not. There are also some matters.
But even then, it's some tenders.
It's some tenders, exactly.
The military should tell us they want to buy shoes. They should advertise
shoes and boots and maybe uniform, for example. And yes, so there also, it's about weaponry, for example, the type of weaponry or the specific description of certain certain tools and gadgets. I don't want to say it's only the national or rather national security. There could be some health items. I don't know. I'm just saying there are some limitations.
Right.
And what should be disclosed by agencies. And if I just take you back to the law is basically the limitations are under Section 6 of the Access to Information Act. And you'll find this stuff like endangering life and safety of a person. For example, if, there could be something that's, I don't give an example. It's just a possibility of some information that shouldn't be published.
Let's say Witness Protection Agency is procuring a house.
Exactly.
We don't want to know where the Witness Protection Agency's houses are.
And you will not see them on the advertisement of the tender and that kind of thing. Invasion of privacy. There are some information that invades privacy of another person, and therefore it will not be accessible easily. And maybe that goes back to the issue of beneficial ownership and what exactly can be disclosed. And that's why we are all back to what are the guidelines, what are the parameters, which line do you not cross in terms of access to information. How much
information do you give?
Exactly. Infringing commercial interests. So, for example, if there's something about a
secret recipe,
exactly, that's usually the one that's used.
Just an example. If it will harm government and the economy, if disclosing that information may harm government or harm the economy of the country, that may be limited.
Is there a list for the exemptions? If there are.
Section 6 of the Act.
So, Section 6
is there reporting on the exemptions? Because it's one thing to have then, the information shared. And then because of those list of exemptions, how is the institution then accountable for the exemptions?
Now, remember what we said about this being a government active process. The agencies that are involved include the Auditor, Office of the Auditor General, the Public Procurement Regulatory Authority, the Office of the Attorney General. So even when, for example, an entity is being audited for why they have not published these tenders, there will be CAJ right there. And then there's also PPRA trying to ask you, why didn't you publish this? And then there's Auditor General. So
don't they report proactively? I would imagine if I had a tender that infringes on privacy or public interest or whatever, and I need then to be exempted from publishing it. One, in South Africa, I think they do publish and withhold some information. But is there a proactive way of reporting that so that it doesn't have to wait for the Auditor General to come and ask, where did this money go? Oh, it was a tender. Where is that tender? Oh, we couldn't publish. It's, for instance, the CS Treasury, in giving exemptions, tax exemptions, is supposed to report to Parliament. why exemptions are given. Now, this has not been happening. So tax exemptions have been given, it hasn't been reported. So is there a reporting requirement on exemptions, or is that a loophole that can be abused?
I'll say this, again, back to the regulations and the fact that they have just 2023 been passed.
Okay.
So you can imagine the parameters, the guidelines. Sorry?
Not it passed.
They were gazetted. On 3rd of May, and we were waiting for how many sittings by Parliament before.
Well, Parliament was busy. It was passing other
so
laws.
unfortunately, again, this is one of those transitional challenges. Because with the previous sort of Parliament, the regulations had progressed. The CJ had done tremendous work. But now with the new Parliament, it means, again, you have to go back to the drawing board and start
the race fresh.
Have they lapsed?
So they are supposed to lapse on the 17th of August. But there was a memo that showed that there's an extension. So we are going to wait for, again, 30 sitting days, so that will lapse around November, tentatively December.
And remember what it means.
So are you saying that Parliament has a window in which to pass them?
Yes, it needs to take effect after.
It's not even really to pass them. Under the Statutory Instruments Act, which is about the delegated legislation and the capacity to develop delegated legislation, which is now what the Commission did, that is with the Ministry and with other agencies, including civil society. These regulations are then given to Parliament. They're published and given to Parliament to, within 30 sitting days, make comment, review, assess, just make sure, even invite and get what are the parameters, have you followed the public participation, what are the implications, etc. And then even give views on whether to amend them or are they okay as they are. Now, the thing is, after the 30 sitting days, they become law.
They actually are. Okay.
If Parliament has nothing,
so
they're actually law, unless Parliament says something.
So 30 days have lapsed and
Not yet. It's been extended.
Supposed to lapse on the 17th of August.
Parliament has been given more time to look at them.
Yes, to look at them and therefore engage. Because the process of delegated legislation or developing legislation on behalf of Parliament, which is now how regulations are done, you have actually, CAJ was given the mandate. Go ahead, do this, just like any other regulations done by agencies. And then when you're done, publish them. Let Kenyans know what you have in store.
These are the new regulations.
And
I want to ask the final question, as we're running out of time. Do you have enforcement powers? You said you can issue notice and all, but how far does your power stretch in forcing an institution to disclose information that a member of the public has asked for?
Okay, let me say this. Our access to information orders have the equivalent powers as a High Court order. Wow. So what an entity or a person can do, once you get our order signed by our Access to Information Commissioner, that is Madam Lucy Ndongo, once they are signed, you can then take them to court for enforcement. Basically, you then get the orders for going in and all that. So we will not give you the orders to tell you storm the entity and get that information you're looking for. But yes, but once you have our order, you just go to court and say, I want an order for going in, so to speak, because they've failed to implement.
And then the court will now start that whole process of issues. Someone says to the officer to come and explain why they're not following the court order, and all this and the other. How effective is this?
It has been extremely effective in this way. I would say in the last, first of all, not everything goes to court. Let me start there. But secondly, in the last 1 year, we've issued, or rather we have gotten positive responses 100% from over 200 agencies that were asked to release that information. So agencies have become very clear, or rather ministry and other government agencies have become very clear. And not only government, it also extends to private entities. They have become very clear, or rather very more knowledgeable on what is their role. So once they see our communication, they may, in quotes, ignore or not have responded to you. But once they see now government has come in and said, you have an obligation under the Access to Information Act, they basically respond.
So on that note, Sarah, is open government working in Kenya? Yes or no?
Yes.
Wanjiru?
Yes, partly. Maybe 60%.
Wesonga?
I'm very optimistic.
It will work. Optimistic is about future.
The progress has been slow but steady. But as they say in Swahili, ukitaka kumla ndovu anza na mkia. So we've really tried. We're halfway through eating the elephant.
Are you serious? So you've already eaten the mkia and the rear legs?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Ladies, thank you very much for joining us today. Sarah Wesonga is a program officer at Right to Information, Article 19. Program Officer for Right to Information at Article 19. And Sarah Muthiga is Assistant Director for Complaints, Legal and Regional Coordination at Office of the Ombudsman.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.